Welcome back to the Deep Dive. For this deep dive, we're tackling a topic you guys requested, teacher and school leader qualifications in British international schools. We dug through some fascinating research, and honestly, some of what we found is pretty surprising.
Yeah, it's definitely an area where things aren't always as they seem.
So let's set the scene here. We're talking about schools that often cost parents, get this, upwards of £20,000 per year. They really promote that high-quality British education, emphasizing the English national curriculum and all that.
Right, they're selling a certain level of prestige and academic rigor.
But the question is, are they always living up to those promises when it comes to who's actually teaching the students?
That's the big question.
Because here's the thing, right? In England, to teach in a government-funded school, you absolutely have to be a qualified teacher. It's
Yeah.
a safeguarding issue, non-negotiable.
Exactly. It's about ensuring the safety and well-being of the students.
But get this, in British international schools, that's not always the case.
It's kind of a Wild West out there.
Yeah, and it's something that even leaders in these schools are starting to raise concerns about.
The Council of British International Schools, COBIS, they did some research and found that 43% of senior leaders saw a need for those international teacher training qualifications, like the IQTS.
So almost half of these school leaders are basically saying, hey, we need more qualified teachers. So why aren't more of these schools, especially with those high fees, making it a top priority?
Well, that's where things get even more interesting when you start looking at the standards and how they're actually enforced.
Okay, so the UK Department for Education, they do have standards for these British schools overseas, BSOs they call them. And there are organizations that inspect and accredit them, like the Independent Schools Inspectorate.
Right, there's a framework in place.
But here's the catch.
Sometimes the qualifications of the inspectors themselves don't quite match up.
Wait, so the people inspecting these schools to make sure they're meeting standards, they might not meet the same standards as inspectors in England.
It's a bit of a head scratcher, isn't
That's
it?
a huge gap.
In England, to be an inspector for government-funded schools, you need QTS, that's qualified teacher status, and at least 5 years of leadership experience.
Makes sense.
But for BSOs, sometimes even unqualified teachers can become inspectors, and they often don't need any leadership experience at all.
How can parents even begin to feel confident that these schools are being held to the same level when the qualifications for inspectors are so different?
It's a valid concern, and it really highlights the need for parents to do their homework.
Okay, so speaking of qualifications, let's unpack what QTS actually means. What does it actually take to be a qualified teacher in England?
So typically, to earn QTS, you need a Bachelor of Education degree. Or you can have a postgraduate certificate in education, the PGCE, on top of your undergraduate degree. It involves, rigorous training and a good amount of classroom experience.
So it's not just about knowing your subject. You need that specific teacher training. And you mentioned earlier that even a master's in education isn't enough on its own. Why is that?
Yeah, a master's is great for deepening your knowledge in a particular area of education, but it doesn't necessarily give you those practical skills and experience you need, like, how to manage a classroom effectively or really understand the nuances of teaching and learning.
Okay, so it's about putting that knowledge into practice. So QTS is kind of the gold standard in England, and it's crucial for safeguarding kids.
Yeah.
But how does all of this play out in British international schools? Are they even required to check for QTS?
Well, that's where things get even trickier. See, in England, there's the Keeping Children Safe in Education policy. It mandates that schools have to check for QTS and keep records.
Seems straightforward enough.
But how this policy applies to British international schools, well, it can be a bit of a gray area.
So there's a chance that some schools might not even be verifying these qualifications thoroughly.
And there have actually been cases where people have falsified their qualifications.
Wow, that's pretty scary. What happens if a school says all their teachers are QTS qualified, but they're not?
There can be some serious consequences. I mean, it's a breach of trust, for one thing, but it can also open the school up to liability issues. If parents find out the school misrepresented teacher qualifications, they could take legal action.
That's a big deal. So transparency is crucial here. Parents need to know who is teaching their kids, especially when they're paying a premium for this education. But how can parents actually find this information?
That can be a challenge, honestly. There isn't always a clear way to get this information.
So it really comes down to parents doing their own digging and asking the right questions.
It's all about being proactive. Don't be afraid to ask schools directly about their hiring practices and how they verify those qualifications.
So we've got this perception of high standards in British international schools, But the reality of teacher qualifications might be a different story, and parents really need to be vigilant. But what can they actually do to make sure they're making informed choices?
Let's dive into that next. We'll explore some practical tips and resources that parents can use.
Sounds like a plan. We'll continue this deep dive after a quick break. Okay, so we've talked about these potential gaps in qualifications. But you're probably thinking, what does this all actually mean for my kid's education?
Right, that's the real question, isn't it? At the end of the day, teachers who have gone through that rigorous training, like the ones with QTS, they're more likely to really understand how students learn.
So it's more than just standing up there and teaching a lesson. There's a whole science to it.
Absolutely. Qualified teachers have, a whole toolbox of strategies. They know how to make lessons engaging, how to tailor their teaching for different learning styles, how to give good feedback.
Okay, that makes sense. But what about things like classroom management? Does that training really make a difference there?
Oh, absolutely. A qualified teacher is trained to set clear expectations, create a positive learning environment, and, importantly, how to manage student behavior,
Right, because that could be tough.
especially in an international setting where you might have students from all different backgrounds.
So a qualified teacher is more likely to create that, well-run classroom where everyone feels safe and supported.
Exactly. It's a win-win for everyone.
And it's not just about the individual classroom, right? It's about the whole school.
Yeah, when you have a school full of qualified teachers, it creates this culture of professionalism and continuous learning. Teachers can collaborate, share best practices, learn from each other.
Right, so it's like a ripple effect.
Exactly.
And of course, we can't forget about the school leadership. Having qualified leaders is just as crucial as having those qualified teachers.
Absolutely. A strong leader sets the tone for the entire school. They're responsible for, hiring and supporting teachers, managing resources, making sure the school is running smoothly.
So what should parents be looking for in terms of qualifications for a school leader?
Well, in England, aspiring head teachers usually go through this intensive program. It's called the National Professional Qualification for Headship, NPQH for short. It equips them with the skills to effectively lead a school.
So it's not just about being a good teacher. Being a head teacher is a whole other level.
Definitely. And let's not forget those soft skills, too. A good leader needs to be a good communicator, a collaborator,
Yeah.
a problem solver.
Yeah, those are essential.
They need to be able to build relationships with the staff, with the parents, with the community.
So when parents are looking at British international schools, they need to be asking about the leadership qualifications and experience, too. What's their vision for the school? How do they support their teachers?
Absolutely. You want to feel confident that the school is being led by someone who's competent, experienced, and truly dedicated to quality education. But we've been talking about the ideal scenario. It's important to acknowledge that there are some real challenges when it comes to staffing these schools.
Okay, like what?
Well, the global teacher shortage is a big one. It's a very competitive market out there. And it can be hard for schools, especially those in, less desirable locations, to attract and keep those qualified teachers.
That makes sense. So are there times when a school might have to hire teachers who don't have all the qualifications?
There might be some situations where a school has to make compromises. For instance, they might hire a teacher who's still working towards their QTS, or maybe someone who has equivalent qualifications from a different country.
But even then, transparency is key, right?
Yeah.
Parents deserve to know.
Absolutely. Schools should be upfront about any staffing challenges they have and explain how they plan to support those teachers in getting the necessary qualifications.
That's good to hear. So even though there are challenges, it sounds like there are ways for schools to do this responsibly, while still focusing on the quality of education.
Right. And there are actually some positive trends happening. For example, there's a growing emphasis on professional development for international teachers. A lot of schools are investing in programs to help their teachers upskill and keep up with the latest research.
That's great. Sounds like things are moving in the right direction. But let's bring it back to you, the listener. We've talked a lot about the importance of qualifications and the challenges and opportunities in international education. So if you were thinking about a British international school, what would be your top priorities?
What questions would you ask to make sure your child's getting a quality education from qualified people?
We've touched on some key things to think about, but let's really dig into those practical steps parents can take to make informed decisions. Because ultimately, it's all about finding that best learning environment for your kid. Okay, so we've talked about the challenges and why you as a parent really need to be informed. So let's get practical. What can you actually do to make sure you're choosing a good British international school for your child?
Well, first things first. Don't just take the school's word for it, Go beyond those glossy brochures and do some digging. Look for online reviews, talk to other parents, see what's on their website.
Yeah, those parent conversations are probably gold. They have the real inside scoop.
Exactly. And
Yeah.
don't hesitate to contact the school directly. Ask to speak with the head teacher or someone on the leadership team. Get a feel for their hiring process, how they support their teachers, what their safeguarding procedures are like.
So it's about being proactive, asking the tough questions. What else can parents do?
Well, remember CUBIS, the Council of British International Schools. They have a directory of accredited schools. They set standards for things like teacher qualifications.
Oh, right.
So checking if a school is COBIS accredited can give you some peace of mind.
That's a good tip. So accreditation, parent feedback, checking those school websites, that's a good starting point. But it's not just about ticking boxes, is it?
No, you're absolutely right. You need to think about the bigger picture, too. What kind of learning environment do you want for your child? What are your family's values? Does the school's culture align with yours?
So it's about finding the right fit, not just a school with qualified teachers, but the right fit for your child and your family.
Exactly. Consider the curriculum, the extracurricular activities, the overall atmosphere of the school. What's important to you, and can this school provide it?
Choosing a school is a big decision, but it doesn't have to be overwhelming. By doing your research, asking the right questions, and trusting your gut, you can make a choice that feels right.
And remember, it's a journey. Education is an ongoing process. The most important thing is finding a school that will support your child and help them reach their full potential.
Well said. So as we wrap up this deep dive into British international schools, here's the big takeaway. Be an advocate for your child's education. Do your research, ask those tough questions, and don't settle for anything less than a quality education from qualified, caring professionals.
And if you're ever feeling lost or unsure, there are resources out there. Organizations like COBI's can offer guidance.
We hope this deep dive has given you the tools to make informed decisions about your child's education. Thanks for joining us, and until next time, happy learning.